the book it tells such detail of the concentration camps. I mean, it is horrifying to read, really horrifying and very moving as well. And I wondered how did you get the stories? Did you meet people?
I did. I actually started with my mother. Well, my mother, of all places. My mother lives part-time in Arizona, and she had gone to a bunch of Anti-Defamation League talks, and I knew she had heard some survivors speak. So I wrote her an email, and I said, do you think you could arrange to maybe talk to some of these people, ask them if they'd be willing to talk to me? And I swear to you, in half an hour, I had a list of 9 names, contact addresses, phone numbers. She had called them all, told them I would be calling. My mother should work for the government. She's amazing.
Oh, interesting, though.
Yeah.
But so they were happy to talk to you in a way that
there were 9 of
is
them.
not.
I wound up speaking to 6. And of those 6, 4 of them, I used their stories and braided them together to create the character of Minka. Because even though they were willing or thought they were willing to talk to me, it was too hard for some of them. And I wouldn't push them to experience something again that they weren't willing to experience. One of the things you see in the Storyteller is that Minka has never spoken of what happened. And I found that to be very true. The survivors I spoke with either really have dedicated their lives to going to museums and to schools, to talking about what happened over and over, or they never said anything. It's like one or the other. There's no in between. So Minka, of course, falls into the latter camp. Yeah. So I started with my mom, and what I'll do is I'll tell you about a few of the survivors that I did wind up speaking with. The first one is a man named Bernie. Bernie grew up in a small town in Poland that had 5,000 Jews in it. By the end of the war, there were 36. He told me a story of how when the Germans began to occupy his village, they would go underneath their homes into the basements and hear the German soldiers walking around upstairs looking for people to take off to the camps. One night they were there with a friend of the family who had a newborn, and the baby was crying. So they started to feed the baby bread, and the baby was still crying, so the mother was juggling it up against her shoulder. Well, she accidentally smothered her own child and wound up walking upstairs, sitting on the curb, and just waiting for 3 days until the soldiers came back, because she didn't want to be here anymore. When they finally did come to take Bernie away, he was grabbing onto the doorframe of his house so tightly that he managed to pry from its nails the mezuzah that was nailed into the doorframe. If you don't know what a mezuzah is, it's a little strip of metal with a scroll inside that's been blessed, and it's meant to bless a Jewish home. He pulled this thing off, and he held it in his hand like this, with his 3 fingers curled under, for the entire war. To the point where, when the war was over, he had to have his hands surgically opened because his fingers had fused shut. And when I met with him, he showed me this mezuzah that he had carried all that time.
God, how extraordinary.
He was finally taken off to Ternopil in 10 wagons full of Jews from his village. He was with his mother and father, and the German soldiers stopped to go have a drink at a pub. They told the Jews to not move. After several hours, his father, who had a bad back, stood up to stretch his back, and a villager saw it, went into the pub and told the soldiers. A soldier came out and shot him in the head. Now, this would have been devastating to any son to see, but Bernie was particularly freaked out because you could see brains when someone was shot in the head. So his mother made him the promise that when he died, it would be with a bullet to the heart, not the head. Just imagine being a mom and making your child that kind of promise. The next survivor I spoke with was a woman named Gerda Weissman-Klein. Very famous as survivors go. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama a few years ago. Gerda also grew up in Poland in a very integrated neighborhood. In 1942, in June, the Nazis came and separated her from her parents. They were taken off and killed at Auschwitz. She was sent to a variety of work camps. After several years at many work camps, in January of 1945, she and 4,000 other women were put on a forced 350-mile march because the Allies were advancing. And they marched through the snow. Only less than 150 of them survived. She said the reason she survived is because in June, when she was taken from her home, she was wearing ski boots that her father had told her to wear. And her best friend Ilse died in her arms during that trip. She was liberated by the Allies, by Americans. She weighed 68 pounds. Her hair was white. She had not showered or bathed in 3 years. And this American soldier held a door open for her to walk through first. And it surprised her. And she said, "I am a Jew, you know." And he said, "Yes, I am too." And they wound up getting married. Everybody likes that one. The last woman I'm going to talk to you about is a woman named Manya. Manya is the survivor that I grew closest to. When I was doing my interviews, I actually stayed in her house with her. After I had gone back home and I was writing, she kept sending me emails saying, "Are you done yet? I'm a very old woman and could die soon, you know." She's still alive and kicking, and she's great. But Manya was wonderful. And Manya, too, grew up in a very integrated Polish community. And she was very bright. She wanted to go to the state high school because it would have given her the best education. But there were only 2 Jews allowed each year at the state high school, and they were already enrolled. So instead, her father's accountant, who was a Christian, managed to get her into Catholic high school. And she studied everything the Catholic kids did, but during catechism, she would sit outside and she would do her homework. Well, at Catholic high school, you had to take a language, and you had a choice of French, which was taught by a very large, unattractive nun, or German, which was taught by a very young, hot teacher. Manya took a lot of German. She became the star German pupil. And in fact, this saved her life multiple times during the war because she was routinely put into secretarial positions instead of working hard labor. So when she was rounded up and put into the ghetto, one of the first jobs she had at a German factory, which was the word for workshop, was working for a man named Herr Baker. Herr Baker was the man who she was his personal secretary, and a bunch of young girls worked in this workshop underneath them. And Herr Baker was a really nice man. He cared about the girls. He called them meine Kinder, my children, which is why one day when he suddenly became very angry and very mean, it scared her. He said, "Nobody leaves this factory. You will stay here and work through the night. I want to hear nothing. I don't want to talk to any of you." Very, very angry. Well, Manya got scared. She ran home, and she was talking to her parents when a soldier showed up and said, "You must come back now. Manya must come back to the factory." She found out later that one of her best friends had pawned her watch to get that soldier to bring her back. And when she got there, they found Herr Baker outside the factory holding a rifle to keep the girls inside, but more importantly, to keep the Nazis from coming in, because that was the night of the first roundup in their village. It was also the last time Manya ever saw her mother and her baby brother, who were taken off to Treblinka. After that, Herr Baker arranged for his girls, his children, to be sent to a farm where he thought they would be safer. While she was working on this farm, a boy showed up and said, "I know what happened to your mother and baby brother." And he told them about this place called Treblinka, where there were these showers that 100 people went into at a time, but they weren't really showers, they were gas. And Manya and her friends listened to this and said, "He's insane. What is he? Why would anyone do that? Why, that's ridiculous." They completely dismissed him. After that farm closed, Manya was sent to another work camp called Pianki. There she was reunited with her father. Her father was sentenced to hard labor. She again was his secretary. She was seeing how this hard labor was killing her father. So one day she took an empty file folder, closed it, and using her fluent German, marched herself to the commandant's office saying, "I cannot speak to anyone about the contents of this file. Only the commandant's eyes can see it." They finally let her into his office. He opened it up, looked at it, and looked at her because it was empty. Now, he was not a nice man. He had recently hanged someone who tried to escape. And Manya said, "I don't know if you have a daughter, but if you do, I hope she would do for you what I have to do for my father." And she told the commandant how he was dying. He listened to her, and a moment later, he wrote something down and changed her father's job so that he did survive that camp. They were sent when it closed to Auschwitz. The loading ramp at Auschwitz was the last place that Manya saw her father. He was killed there. She was not killed. She was sent to the showers. And she suddenly remembered everything that boy said about Treblinka. And she expected to die, but she did not. She was deloused, she was given a uniform, she was given a tattoo, her head was shaved, and 6 days later, she was shipped out to yet another work camp, this one in Hindenburg, where she was assigned to doing night welding. She was speaking German when one of the guards heard her, said, "Have you ever done inventory?" She said, "Oh, yeah, I've done plenty of inventory." She had never done inventory in her life. They moved her into the office where she was working with Germans, and she was routinely locked in the closet during observations, because had she been found working with Germans in her striped uniform, she would have been shot on the spot. Finally, after 4 years of working in camp, she was sent to Bergen-Belsen. Nobody worked at Bergen-Belsen. You went there to starve and to die. She was living in a barracks with 900 other people. When she cut her arm, it became infected. She contracted typhoid. One morning, feverish and near death, she climbed over all these bodies to get to some fresh air, rolled out onto her back, and looked up and saw there was no one in the guard tower. It was a white flag. The Allies had come to liberate them. The British came and they set up medical tents When she got there, they said, you need to have your arm amputated. She begged them to not take her arm. They wound up giving her the last shot of penicillin, which they had been saving for an Allied soldier. And to this day, she still has use of her arm.
Wow. Gosh, well, I'm nodding as if I recognised all this.
But you
of
do.
course I do.
You can see it in the
because, as
book.
you will find, there is that many of those stories are indeed in the book. So in a way, the book is a tribute to...
That's exactly the way I see it. They trusted me with their stories, and I was very dedicated to making sure they were represented honestly.
Because they're very faithfully reproduced.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you know, I have not had many emails like this. Most emails, honestly, that I've received about this book have been about how transformative it's been. And I have never in 20 years received emails like I'm getting for this book.
Yeah, that's
but
fantastic.
every now and then I get one from someone who says something like, blood, blood, and gore. That's all this book was. And all I can think is, well, you know, it is the Holocaust. I don't know what they were expecting. But the truth is, the stories these people told me was so much worse than anything I wrote in that book. You know, when you add to it what each of them individually went through, it was horrific.
Well, I was thinking it must have been extremely hard hearing the stories, but was it not even harder writing them?
It actually
because you
was
have
harder.
To process them
No, it was harder for me to hear them because
was
it
it?
was very emotional. They were crying. I was crying. You know, it was like reliving it. And, you know, I don't know why I think of it this way, but I think of that old Catholic adage of the sin eater, the priests who would take on the sins of the dying person and hold them inside themselves. That's what it felt like for me. Like I was taking on all this emotion and I just had to hold it in me. And then the minute I was allowed to release it on the page, it felt good.